So I think that this idea of saving being important is captured by a quote from George Clason, who's the author of The Richest Man in Babylon, and really popularized. And I knew the quote from Dave Chilton, but when I went and I actually posted this one in the Rational Reminder community and attributed it to Dave Chilton, and someone said, actually, that's from The Richest Man in Babylon, which predates The Wealthy Barber by many decades. So the quote is, "Pay yourself first." um,
3 words, but so much wisdom. Right?
Yes. And it's really just like in to have any shot at building wealth, while fighting off all of the temptations to spend, which we're surrounded with every day, you have to save. You have to pay yourself before you have the chance to give in to the societal, biological, and psychological pressures that lead many people to overspend. So that's the quote.
Yeah, I think this one, it really, you can take it in a lot of different directions, but it has so much resonance. I think it was Mark McGrath who did a piece in the Globe not long ago about top-down budgeting, or this
Mm,
idea that
yep.
rather than worrying about what you spend, and even more what you spend on individual categories, how much you spend on restaurants and entertainment and whatever, start with the savings part. And if you get that part right, it doesn't really matter what you do with the rest of it. Now, what does that mean? You need to have some kind of specific financial plan. You can't just say, I'm going to save $100 a month and say, that's all I need. Like, you need to do some kind of planning to see how much you need to save. But people might set a target. They want to max their RSP, or if you can afford it, max the RSP and the TFSA, whatever it is. And, if you're able to look after that by automating it, having it come off your paycheck, you don't really need to fuss too much about what you spend. You can spend what's left, and it doesn't really matter what you spend it on.
Yep.
So nobody likes, I don't think anyway, nobody really loves budgeting and itemizing every penny they spend. And with this kind of pay yourself first strategy, you don't really need to do that.
Yep. I am not a fan of budgeting. Some people are, which
Yeah,
I
neither
find,
am I.
yeah, I don't get it. I don't get how that can be like fun or enjoyable. Some people are into it. But I do the same thing. I decide how much I want to save or need to save, and then don't worry about how I spend the rest. The only thing to be cautious of, I guess, is going into debt. Because if you save the amount that you want, but also have a line of credit and you're building that balance up every year, that can be
Yes,
problematic.
for sure.
So I think, like you said, Dan, automating that is huge. If you can set up payroll deductions through your employer, that's great. Not all employers offer that. PWL does, which is great. But if you can't do that, then just setting up an automatic contribution into your investment or retirement accounts is a pretty close approximation. But if you can get payroll deductions, that's pretty good. Now, in terms of how much to save, like you mentioned, Dan, that's got to be based on some kind of financial plan or something like that. The Wealthy Barber, and I think The Richest Man in Babylon also suggest 10% of your income always. Now, that's is a tricky one. If you asked an economist, they would generally disagree, I think, because if you look at the life cycle model, you'd probably be saving less early on in your career when you have less income available. And then as your income rises through your career trajectory, you'd start saving a higher proportion of your income. And overall, it gets you to a place where you can fund your future retirement consumption. And that's very different from 10%. Like an economist might say that you're sacrificing a huge amount of utility by saving 10% of your income when your income is relatively low. You could be enjoying your life more. Anyway, I don't have a super strong opinion on this. I think the counter argument there is that if you don't start saving early, then you're not going to have the discipline to start saving later. I don't know. I don't know how you approach this with clients, Dan, but I don't have a super strong opinion.
Yeah, I think, honestly, for I don't love a 10% rule of thumb, because I would say that for people with lower incomes, that's a stretch. And if they
Right.
can save sort of 5 or 6%, that's probably very good. And if you have a very high income, you need to be saving more than 10%.
Right.
So I think it's going to depend a lot on your income. I would also say, and you kind of hinted at this with earlier in your career, it's okay to save a lot less than that if you're in your peak spending years and you've got
Right.
young kids and a mortgage.
Right.
And especially paying off a mortgage is increasing your net worth in a similar way to savings. And then again, as you get older, eventually, if you've paid that mortgage off, now you need to increase your savings, right?
Right.
If
Yeah.
15, 20% of your income was going towards your mortgage before and now it's paid off, you need to redirect that into a different way. So, look, rules of thumb are always problematic, but I think this one is really a much more personal decision than any rule of thumb can possibly help you with.
Yep. I agree with that. And that would show up if you did a financial planning projection with proper financial planning software, that all of the things that you just said would show up. Okay, so that's pay yourself first, necessary precondition. Next, we have some quotes on investing. So investing it's as much a psychological endeavor as it is a financial one. It involves risk and uncertainty about the future, which are quantifiable to an extent financial issues. But doing it well, investing well, requires overcoming the countless behavioral biases that plague most investors. Ben Graham, who's one of the fathers of financial analysis and of the investment profession as a whole, said the investor's chief problem and even his worst enemy is likely to be himself. So I think this is really important for any investor to understand before they begin investing. Behavioral biases come in two main forms: errors in cognitive reasoning, called cognitive errors, and feelings or emotions that affect decision making, called emotional biases. Taken together, investors are really fighting an uphill battle to make good long-term financial decisions in the face of uncertainty and their own psychology. So that's the issue. And then I've got a couple pretty good quotes, I think, that address that, just about investor discipline. So we've got famous late investor and fund manager Sir John Templeton. He said the four most expensive words in the English language are "this time is different." This is really just a powerful reminder that regardless of the objective realities of a situation, narratives can easily sway people's investment decisions during extreme market conditions. When we have extreme positive returns, investors will clamor for explanations that not only justify the usually accompanying high stock valuations, but also justify their continued increases. Like at the peak of the dot-com bubble, people thought valuations would keep increasing because of the words "this time is different." Same as ARK when the ARKK ETF was just going through the roof and valuations were wild. It was the same thing, same kind of narrative. This time is different. Now, in both of those examples, many of the investors were buying stocks at historically anomalous valuations that haven't been seen since. And as I mentioned, they were literally saying the words that Templeton is cautioning against. This time is different. The internet changes everything. AI changes everything. Robotics, whatever else the ARK thing was about. So that's on the positive side when returns are good. I think the same thing happens when markets decline. Investors create narratives about why markets will not recover this time because of whatever is causing prices to decline, or why they'll go down further. Like if you think about COVID, how many times did we hear unprecedented? Too many times, an unprecedented number of times.
It's so funny that you said that, because when I first read the quote from Templeton about "this time it's different," it's like you don't have to even use those words. You can just say it's unprecedented, because I've been hearing this, in so many contexts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in April we heard it, right? People called us about, the Trump tariffs, and
Yeah.
Ben, you and I did some client communication on that front, right? And it was the same sort of thing. This has never happened before. COVID, it's unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this. And I guess,
Yeah.
it's true. We have not seen this specific circumstance before. But every market crash is caused by something that is unprecedented. And yeah, if we're going to react and change our investment strategy just because current conditions have not been exactly the same as this in the past, yeah, you're doomed to be changing courses, constantly.
Yeah, and we have a quote that addresses kind of that exact point in a minute. But I think that what you just said is really important to acknowledge, that when we do see extreme asset prices on either side, increases or decreases, it usually because something is different. Like the underlying cause and the accompanying narratives,
Yeah.
they're always unique, which is why they cause asset prices. We've never seen this before, and so asset prices do change because of that new information. But what doesn't change is the reality that valuations matter, at least eventually. Like in COVID, valuations drop, expected returns increase. During the dot-com bubble or the ARK thing, valuations go really, really high, and then eventually they come back to earth. Valuations are kind of the closest thing to gravity in financial markets. They don't predict returns as well as, physics predicts the kinetic properties of an object in motion, but ignoring valuations on the basis that this time is different is, as Templeton expressed in his nice quote, generally an expensive mistake. Now, one way to stay, and this is the point that you brought up a minute ago, Dan, about changing strategies. Well, one way to stay grounded through periods of extreme market conditions in either direction is to have a lot of conviction in your investment philosophy. This is a quote from David Booth, co-founder of Dimensional Fund Advisors. He said, "The most important thing about an investment philosophy is you have one that you can stick with, Now, the insight on this one is really deep. This is one of my favorite quotes. Financial markets have generally rewarded long-term disciplined investors, but many, if not most investors, sabotage their own returns by moving in and out of investment strategies or styles at precisely the wrong times. Even an objectively suboptimal, and I'm going to take a shot at dividend investing here, even an objectively suboptimal investment strategy like dividend focus investing might be the optimal investment philosophy for some people if the dividends help them to stay disciplined and stay invested.
Yeah. I would argue that is the main value of
Right.
dividend investing. I mean, I think we agree that it's suboptimal, but it's not a poor strategy if it's something that you can stick with. I mean, you could do an awful lot worse as an investor than buy and holding dividend stocks over decades, right?
Totally.
So yeah, it doesn't need to be perfect. Nobody's investment strategy is perfect, but that is certainly one that has some behavioral advantages.
Yep. Now, and the hard thing about sticking with an investment philosophy is that any investment strategy, no matter how well founded its underlying philosophy is, can appear to be wrong or even stupid for long periods of time. Now, this probably ties back into the caution about this time is different too. I think ARK is, again, a good example. It's actually a really interesting example. So when ARK was on its big tear, when everyone started hearing about it, I heard from lots of previously disciplined index investors who were considering abandoning their entire index fund investment philosophy because the ARK narrative was so strong. And its manager, like Cathie Wood, she was taking direct aim at index funds and a lot of her commentary and a lot of the ARK literature. She had called index funds the most massive misallocation of capital in history. And she'd said that index funds are basically overweighting the old dying companies, which are at risk of being disrupted, while underweighting the companies that are going to disrupt them, which is what ARK was focusing on. So she was really taking direct shots at index funds, which was interesting. Now, for a while, and this is why it's hard for people to ignore stuff like this, it seemed like she was right because ARK just went to the moon. It was crazy. Completely smoked market cap weighted index funds. And then eventually ARK, the ARKK, the main fund, and I think most of those funds did eventually come back to earth, which is what tends to happen with funds like that. But the thing is, when you look at the timing of it, anyone who bailed on their index funds to chase ARKK's returns after the fund had posted its big returns, which is when everybody became aware of it, they got burned. And that was the Morningstar had a post on this a while ago where they looked at the dollar weighted returns of investors in that fund. Most investors weighted by dollars lost money because they piled in after the good returns and ate all of the bad returns. So that's typical. But the interesting thing is that investors in ARKK who truly believed in that investment philosophy and stuck with it from before Cathie Wood was all over the financial media when she was basically an unknown fund manager, if they'd stuck with it from then right through its eventual crash, which wouldn't have been easy, through until now, they've actually done fine. They've roughly matched, even slightly outperformed SPY, S&P 500 ETF. Now, I'm not condoning the ARKK strategy, to be clear, but my point is that conviction in any investment strategy, any investment philosophy, it's going to be tested over time, and the tests are hard. Like going through ARK's decline would have been pretty rough, I think. But as long as the philosophy leads to reasonably well diversified and low cost portfolios, I think having an investment philosophy that you can stick with through good times and bad is far more important. Like you said with the dividend strategy, Dan, it's far more important than having the perfect investment philosophy. Now, I do think that the well diversified and low cost qualifier is important. Some strategies like trading zero DTE options or YOLOing single stocks, those are likely to lead to bad outcomes. But if it's low cost, well diversified, and you can stick with it, it's probably okay.
I think one of the most amazing findings that I remember coming across was in Meb Faber's book. I think it's called Global Asset Allocation. And, he sort of tucks it away near the end of the book. But what he did was he back tested a whole number of model portfolios, kind of well known ones. The Yale University one and just a basic 60/40 Vanguard portfolio. And he did, some had commodities, some had real estate, some had, alternative asset classes. And he tested them over about 40 years. What blew me away was that the variance in the portfolio performance over that full period was less than a percentage point.
Wow.
So, and even he admits in the book too, because like this shocked me. I thought that they would be similar, but I didn't think they would be that similar.
Huh.
And this is exactly the lesson. The point is, nobody would have stuck to any one of those model portfolios. I shouldn't say no one, but only the most disciplined investors would have, right? Because during every decade, he looked at, like I said, 40 some years, there were 10-year periods where some of them got absolutely smoked and others did phenomenally well. And then the reverse would happen. So if you just stuck with one and held it, you did fine, but almost nobody does that. They move, as you said, from whatever's hot to whatever's not, and back at the wrong time. And, we just sort of cheat ourselves out of the benefits that come from long-term discipline.
Yep.
So I got one here that I just took from, the sage himself, Warren Buffett. And the quote is, "The stock market is designed to transfer money from the active to the patient. If you aren't willing to own a stock for 10 years, don't even think about owning it for 10 minutes. And you have to be prepared when you buy a stock to have it go down 50% or more and be comfortable holding it." And the 50% number is what jumped out to me. And this is something I've used even in risk discussions with clients, because it unfortunately doesn't apply just to a stock. It applies to the market in general. An individual stock can go down more than 50%. But what we'll often say with clients is, any equity allocation that you hold, even if it's very broadly diversified, you need to be prepared for the possibility that it could fall 50%. It did in 08, 09, right? This is not ancient history. And a lot of people are pretty shocked by that because they seem to think, a bad bear market is 20%. And it's like, no, it can be a lot worse than that. And if you're not comfortable with that kind of volatility, and let's face it, many people are not, then you need to have a more conservative portfolio. Simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually the direction I want to go next. So after settling on an investment philosophy, one of the most fundamental decisions that investors need to make is how to allocate their portfolios, like you were just saying. How much in stocks versus bonds, how much in the stock market of each country, which stocks within each country. So Bill Sharp and Gene Fama both have great, simple quotes that offer, I think, a pretty good starting point. Bill Sharp said in a talk once in the early 2000s, I think, "The global market portfolio is a good place for you to start." That stems from Sharp's work on the capital asset pricing model, which implies that the optimal risky portfolio for all investors is the global market portfolio combined with risk-free assets or leverage, depending on their risk tolerance. So that's an interesting starting point there. Now, what is the global market portfolio? That's another interesting question. State Street estimates that it is about 45% public stocks, 21% government bonds, 9% investment grade corporate bonds, and then a whole bunch of other stuff makes up the remaining 25%. There's like gold in there, high yield bonds. I can't remember, private equities in there, bunch of stuff. Now, we asked Fama about this when he was on, like private equities in the market portfolio. Should we actually invest in that? And Fama's answer was something like, it's not super obvious that we should because we just don't have good data on how that asset class behaves and the fees are really high. So just because the global market portfolio is there, doesn't mean that we actually have to invest in that, but it's a really good place to start. And then Fama's quote kind of drives this point home. He says, you have to talk yourself out of the market portfolio. So his point, like the private equity example I just gave, is that there can be good reasons to be different from the global market portfolio, but it's important to be clear on what those reasons are and why they apply to you specifically. Another good one there is home country bias, which Fama has long been an advocate for. There are lots of reasons that we've covered in past episodes for why home country bias can make sense for an investor. And that's, again, a good reason to be different from the global market portfolio. But I think that as a starting point is a really nice idea because it takes a lot more conviction in whatever your strategy is to talk yourself from the global market portfolio into a portfolio of like 3 stocks than it does to talk yourself from the global market portfolio into a globally diversified portfolio of public stock and bond index funds.
Yeah, you can probably split that a little bit further, right? In the sense that I'm sure nobody is suggesting that most people should start their asset allocation decision at 45% stocks, right? I mean, it might be higher or lower depending on a lot of factors. So I don't know, like, given that the risk qualities in stocks and bonds are dramatically different, I think you can feel comfortable finding whatever relative mix you want between those two overall asset classes, depending on your specific situation. But once you break it down further and say, okay, if I'm going to hold 60% stocks instead of 45, let's start the discussion with the market cap portfolio. And we can go from there, but we're not going to do, 90% US stocks and 10% the rest of the world or some other highly concentrated allocation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Even the stock bond piece is interesting. Like, why is the global portfolio so heavily weighted toward non-stock assets? There's a lot of reasons why.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I guess too. I mean, businesses. I remember reading this number before, but I don't recall what it was. Like, what proportion of businesses are publicly traded versus privately owned? It's only a small portion of them are publicly traded.
Yep.
So the market portfolio, as you said, it private equity is in it, but
Investable private equity. That's not
exactly like it does. That doesn't mean every individual small business on the globe, which is clearly uninvestable. So it's it really depends on how you break it down. But yeah, I was a bit surprised too that it's only 45% of the market portfolio by that measure.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that I love that quote that you have to talk yourself out of the market portfolio. Like if we just take that as a starting point, and if you're going to be different from that, you have to have really good. I mean, factor tilting is another good one. Like if you say you want to have factor tilts, great, but you tilt away from the market portfolio. You don't buy the 50. Well, some people would say that you can do this, but I would say you have to have a lot more conviction if you want to buy the 50 stocks that load most aggressively onto the factors that you want exposure to. You really have to believe that you have the right factor mix to be that aggressive with your tilt as opposed to just slightly tilting away from the market portfolio.